bit of breeze will be nice. Hopefully we'll get some breeze later today. This temperature could not be more perfect for what we're doing here. So this big bad boy has got his bones inside the paws, so we're going to work on this all in steps. I'm going to go ahead and take the skull out first. So we've got a bunch of tools that we're going to be working with, and these are all typically tools that I made or tools that I found. We're going to work with an ulu, and after going to Alaska several years ago and watching some Inuit ladies use an ulu to process out all kinds of things, it was amazing how incredibly efficient this cutting tool was, even down to how you hold it and the different joints you use in your arms to facilitate its usage is wonderful. I'm a huge fan of ulus. I've got a couple different pairs of surgical scissors for working around the nose, working around the mouth, and working around the claws. I've got a couple little small butter knives that I've sharpened way up past the tip to allow me, again, to make very, very small cuts in very, very precise places. I've got a couple other little pieces of steel that I have left over in my knife shop when I'm making handmade, making custom knives, that I fashion into really small little cutting tools to be able to flesh out animals like this without punching holes in it. Surgical equipment is also a must for being able to really get close around joints, around claws, around paws, around feet, around ears, eyes, and jaws. So, I'm a huge fan of sitting kind of like this when I'm tanning the whole pretty much, or at least fleshing the entire hide out. Now his skull, his lower mandible, is going to start right about here. I want to remove everything inside, and then we'll start the task of fleshing the rest of it out, it's called. I'm going to make a little bit more of an incision right up until about where the jaw starts. And he's still a little bit frozen, which is actually good to me. He's not terribly room temperature. It buys me a little bit more time because he's still cold. And it keeps the skull in one big solid piece and makes it a little bit easier to handle. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to continue to cut him right until about, I'm going to get my landmarks till about right here. One of the most important traits to possess, especially with tanning like this, where we're doing it all by hand, is patience. If I get in a really big hurry, I'm probably going to at least punch a hole in this guy, if not make something irreversibly bad happen. So I'm going to be very mindful about what I'm doing. And then, not to mention, I might cut myself. So, I have exposed the base of the skull, making everything that I'm going to do a little bit easier. I like to start with the upper and the lower jaw. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to try to separate everything from the gum, and I'm going to leave it on the skull as I flesh this out. I'm going to start at the nose, and at the same time honoring this animal. This was a big boy. Trying to have him as beautiful after the fact as he was when he was alive. A very, very sharp cutting tool is pretty important at this point. I'm going to make a cut to get an idea how much flesh I have here to work with. Then I'm going to start up a little bit higher, and I want to cut all the flesh out of the sinus cavity as much as I can. The thicker the hide is, the harder it's going to be to get your brain solution to absorb all the way through it. Now shortly, I'm going to cut into the sinus cavity. Now what I'm going to do, being patient, is I'm going to look inside and outside to make sure that I'm separating as much of the flesh, fat, and membrane as I possibly can. It's going to make what I do in about 3 steps from now a lot easier, because all of this, or as much as I can physically remove, has to be taken off. If not, because that is meat that will rot, that will potentially destroy everything I've done. So very carefully, I'm going to continue to cut that away. Everybody is particular to certain cutting tools. I'm a huge fan of smaller tools for things like this. I don't want to make big cuts, I want to make very, very small cuts. I'm just about ready to puncture the nasal cavity, right about there. So I'm going to look down and see about where I just punched through. That was where I just went. So here to here is important. I'm going to follow that line, making sure that I'm not cutting any big holes that I don't want in the hide. I nicked him a little bit right there. So now I know that was a little bit shallow right there. So I like to put my finger, or I'm going to use my palm, and then my knee for the rest of this in larger spots, and raise the area that I'm working on up a little bit so I can isolate what I'm cutting on. And I can see the follicles from the facial hair right there. So now I know I'm pretty much right where I want to be. So very carefully, I'm going to fillet the meat off, leaving just the dermis, or the skin with the hair on. As you can see, the nose is coming off in pretty good shape. So now I'm getting close to the skin again. I want to be very, very careful because all the connective tissue is pulling it in different directions. Pulling the skin that I'm looking for, I want to be very careful using the geometry of the blade, whatever blade I'm using, very, very carefully to remove this, very purposely. I'm not making big sweeps with this because then I'm going to punch a hole in the hide. When you take the hide off of an animal with the intentions of tanning it, it's a very different process than just taking the hide off the animal to discard it, because you're not concerned with punching holes in it. I'm very concerned with punching holes in this guy. It makes it a lot harder to tan and could rip. So we are down to about right there, just about at the bridge of the nose, where the cartilage stops and the bone starts, which is right about there. So that's bone, that's cartilage. So I've pretty much got most of the maxilla, or the upper jaw, done. So I'm going to work on the bottom jaw now. Now I do want to be mindful as the sun starts to come up. I'm going to make sure that as much of the black hair as I can is tucked under, because black is going to absorb heat, which would increase the possibility of the hair getting hot, creating that bacteria I don't want and starting to slip. So I'm really mindful of that. So I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom jaw very carefully. Start separating the gum and the flesh. It's a little thicker right here. Top jaw and the bottom jaw right at the lip, if you've ever seen a bear move that, is very, very, very thick. So it's going to take a little bit more to tan that. There's typically 1 braining for the entire hide, 2, 3, or maybe 4 brainings for the head, the hump, and the rump, which is right behind the head is the hump, and then the rump is the back side of the animal. Now I'm getting down into the eyes. See if I can see my finger through. I cannot. So, very carefully, continue to cut through the skin. Now the actual hide is going to be attached to the eyelid, so I've got to punch through that. Ultimately I'm going to see the hole where the eye is, but I have to cut around it. here's where I'm going to punch through. I'll show you what it looks like. That's the inside, that's the globe, that's the eyeball right there. This is where I'm going to cut through, and that's where I'm going to end up, right there. So that's kind of a landmark. If at any time you feel that your tool is getting dull, sharpen it up. There's where I'm at, right about there, right behind the ears on the bear, right about the base of the skull is where I've gotten to so far. So here's the ear. Here's the ear. That's where I'm at right there. So I'm basically just going to cut right down through the cartilage. I'm going to stay close to the skull, which is right there, and then the skin or the hide is right there. So there's the cartilage of the ear. I've already nicked it just a little bit. I don't want to go too deep or too shallow. I just want to separate the skull from the ear. If I want to be a little conservative about it, I go closer to the skull. So I'm going to cut down through the cartilage, basically, and remove the ear and the cartilage that's actually in the external ear from the skull. There's one. Let me pull it apart a little bit more so I can show you. So that's what I've got. I cut it relatively flush. Those are my two fingers right there. Now when we're all done, to keep this thing from turning, we're going to cut all the hair on the inside out because there's a little bit of flesh in there that makes the tanning process very, very challenging. So the ear is going to look like that with the hair on the outside but not on the inside. All right, we are almost ready to remove the skull entirely. Now is when you don't want to get impatient. Now is when you mess it up. A little bit of attachment left. Now I'm definitely going to have to go back and remove a little bit more flesh from the head. The head is always the most difficult part of an animal to clean all the meat off of. So it's not gonna be able to do too much with this skull ultimately. It's in pretty beat up shape. But fortunately the animal did die relatively quick. So we'll set that guy there. And take a look at this. This is the face before it's tanned out. We're going to go back and work on the rest of this cartilage with some of the surgical scissors and surgical tools later. Clean all the rest of this out, all this meat, all of this. There's still a lot of fat left in there because that will not allow the hide to tan out. Most importantly, it won't let the brain solution penetrate into the hide. Two, that meat will rot.